I think we'll start it there. Good evening, everyone from London, and a very warm welcome to this Christie's Education Lecture. My name is Dominic Hopkins-Powell. I'm the Programme Manager for Christie's Education, and I'm delighted to have you join us from all over the world tonight. Now, before we step into the mystical land of this remarkable artist, please allow me to read the following notice. By registering for this event, you agree not to record the presentation in any way. All attendees will be muted and will remain anonymous. This lecture is being recorded, and recordings will be available on request via email for registered participants. Please do feel free to add questions in the chat during the talk, and I'll put them to our speaker at the end. Now, the British artist Ithell Colquhoun maintained that visual art is a powerful prospecting or divining tool that can trace and translate vital energies moving between worlds. She celebrated the agencies of Cornwall's granite, serpentine, slate, sandstone, limestone, chalk, and the rest, proposing that the inner life of a region depends on its geological substrate. This evening, in partnership with the Art History Festival 2025, we are delighted to be joined by the art historian Lizzie Perotte to explore this year's theme of art and nature through the lens of Colquhoun's work. Now, Lizzie is a specialist in modern and contemporary art and has designed art education programs for museums, galleries, and universities. She's worked at the National Gallery, the Tate St Ives, and the Institute of Contemporary Arts, and her doctoral research was shaped by post-colonial studies focusing on the work of modern British artists, such as Jacob Epstein. Tonight, Lizzie is going to explore for us how Ithell Colquhoun's work has become contemporary, generating creative conversations with artists and eco-critical thinkers. The lecture is going to focus on Colquhoun's interest in the animism of geophysical forces and her creation of a radical aesthetics that can stimulate enchantment and unknowing. And that all being said, it's far too much of me talking, Lizzie. Over to you.
Oh, Dominic, that was fantastic. I love that. Gave me lots of brilliant sort of points that I want to pick up on. And just as an introduction, everyone, I must apologize. My voice is a bit cracky, and I have been struggling with a bit of a cold for the past few days. So I've got a whole load of fluids sort of on my desk here, and some lozenges. So if it gets a bit tricky, I will try and rehydrate that way. So yes, thank you so much. And I've given it a title which was advertised with the Art History Festival, and then I have retitled the talk, as you can see here, and I've called it Livingstone's Unlearning with Ithell Colquhoun, because I want to put it out here while I've still got the energy to concentrate right at the beginning. I want to put it out here that what's at stake for me with my research and with my, certainly with this lecture, what the driving issue is, what is at stake is this idea of, can art be a tool for unknowing and unlearning? And that is a tool for unlearning things that we've maybe inherited from the Enlightenment, deep levels of ways that we perceive things, deep structures of perception, regimes of seeing. And the idea, I suppose, coming from the Enlightenment is this idea of a sort of classificatory approach, of bounding knowledge, of separating things like art and nature, or nature and culture, of male and female, this idea of oppositional modes of perception. So for me, it's a biggie, isn't it? Like, can art help us with this? And how on earth can Ithell Colquhoun, some of you probably haven't heard of Ithell Colquhoun, maybe you have because you've joined this lecture, but she was pretty much underground, certainly under the radar for many, many years. And it's only really been in the past sort of decade, or maybe even 5, that she has emerged into the limelight. So we'll think about that. But I've, as Dominic brilliantly introduced for me, I've taken a focus on the lithic, or the geological and stony and rocky. And I have used the title, I've already invoked a book that Ithell Colquhoun produced in 1957 called The Living Stones, Cornwall. She called it a Gnostic guidebook to the region. And in the book, she claims an animist is what I am. And for this reason, I'm very interested in her work. her use of animism to unlearn, to find things that are hidden from view, unseen. Now, in terms of current eco-critical thinking, I've been really inspired by the work of Karen Barad, and she produced a book in 2012 called Meeting the Universe Halfway, and it's got a brilliant subtitle, Quantum Physics and the Entanglement of Matter and Meaning. And there's a brilliant quote in there where I put up with, who gets to count as one who has the ability to die? A rock, a river, a cloud, the atmosphere, the earth. But what she's pointing out is this dualism. She says the dualism between the organic and the inorganic is the most stubborn dualism of all, that basically stops animacy in its tracks. So this is the dualism, like many eco-critics, that she wants to tackle, how to unlearn enlightenment dualisms and divisions of knowledge. So there's my start. It's a biggie, isn't it? Can Ithell Colquhoun help us? Well, Ithell Colquhoun, why now? Here we've got an image of the front of the catalogue. That's the current retrospective that's on at Tate Millbank. We can see the front of Tate Millbank down there. But it started out in January in Tate St Ives. And there's the brilliant frontis of Tate St Ives on Porthmere Beach in St Ives. And I was fortunate enough, I spend a lot of my time in Cornwall. I have a home in Penzance. And I was lucky enough to work for Tate St Ives running education in 1993 when it opened. And I saw the Colquhuon exhibition in its opening days, really in January, and was blown away by this show. Thought it was extraordinary. And I went to the conference for the opening of the show. And that was the big question they put forward. Colquhuon, why now? Why does her work feel urgent? Why does it feel current? What can we use it for? And as I say, many of you may not have heard of Colquhuon. She was born in 1906. She was actually born in Assam in India. She came over to the UK as a child, and she died in Cornwall in 1988. And she was really probably most recognized and widely known in 1939, the early 1940s, and she was known for her connection to the Surrealist movement. She was excommunicated from that movement for being interested in joining occult societies. And that was at the time thought to be inappropriate for being a member of the Surrealist group. But she moved down to Cornwall pretty much from the late 40s. And from this time, her work sort of slightly slipped out of view. So why has it emerged again at this time? What are we making of Colquhuon? Well, the front cover of the show is this very much more well-known work, I think, by her. It's certainly been shown by Tate during the past few years, often been shown in the collection displays of Tate Britain. It's a work from 1938, and it's called Scylla, based on the myth from Homer's Odyssey of these very dynamic rocks, Scylla and Charybdis, that are very threatening, that come in to sort of basically crush boats that pass through the Messina Straits. And when Colquhuon made this work, it was exhibited in 1939 at the Mayer Gallery. And after that, it wasn't exhibited till just before her death, really, or a little while before her death, at the New Lynn Orion Gallery in Cornwall, and then it was purchased from there by the Tate, purchased from the artist. But she also, earlier in 1939, had illustrated it in an essay she wrote about the volcanic. It was a dreamlike story about volcanoes. She also talked, when she wrote about this piece, about how it was both phallic and feminine. And it reminded her of being in a dreamlike state in the bath, of looking through her knees. So you can sort of read it in this ambiguous way as sort of a rocky landscape, or as a rather intimate and erotic sort of close-up of folded skin and maybe some pubic hair as you look down through the water in the bath. But this is what I feel is most important about Colquhoun's work, is this idea of being unstable, and when you look at it, not knowing what it means. What is it? It's a state of unknowing. She was very interested in this. Okay, so Another reason for the Tate show, Tate foregrounding its own works, but also this incredible archive of Colquhoun's work that Tate owns. And is basically approximately 5,000 sketches, drawings, and artwork from the 30s to the 80s. And the Tate actually received some work and certainly Colquhoun's library after her death in 1988. But a lot of her work from the archive went to the National Trust. And in fact, they struggled really to maintain it. And in 2016, that also went to Tate. So there was a unifying of the archive. Now, in 2022, I was doing an MA in Environmental Humanities at the University of Plymouth, a very progressive program. I wanted to expand my theory base, and I just sort of become semi-retired. And I thought, what should I do for a dissertation? Let me think about artists who've been working maybe in Cornwall, and what could I do for primary research? And I'd heard of Colquhuon. So I decided to go to the Tate archive and have a look. And I was a little bit put off. It was so complicated. She was a writer, a visual artist, but also an occultist. And I didn't know what to make of a lot of the material, the incredible layers of research. I didn't know if I liked a lot of the artwork. It puzzled me. And for that reason, I thought, yes, this has to be a good thing. This idea of not being able to classify it or categorize it. So the archive incredibly important. And I think the Tate show has done a huge amount of work in finding a language to open up Colquhoun's work, to make it sort of accessible, to start the journey in engaging with her work. So thank you, Tate, for this incredible show. And there are beautiful things like this from the archive, these little watercolor or gouache paintings. On the left, we've got Earth Forces. She described this as a record without elaboration on an image from a half-conscious experience. She said there's an interdependence of the animal, the vegetable, and mineral kingdoms of the earth and their vitalization. So she's interested in this interrelationship, this relational thinking. Now, when I come back to what's at stake for me? Art that's about unknowing. But it's also about art that can give you this idea of relational thinking. And there's a brilliant post-colonial theorist called Gayatri Spivak who put forward this term, planetarity. My goodness. She said it's an ethics. It's an ethics. It's not like globalization or the global, which is a type of idea of the human mastery of the earth. But planetarity is all about these more than human forces, these interrelationships of things, these interconnections that are so big and vast in their entwinements that it's almost impossible to imagine. So how can art help us cross this threshold and give us a sense of these interconnections? Well, I think that Colquhoun was interested in art and in magic. She was, as I say, an occultist, because she felt these offered ways to cross these thresholds. Just again, one of the things that I was involved in at the opening of the Colquhuon show, I curated a little exhibition in a local space called Living Stones, and it put together the work of 4 contemporary artists. And I timed it with the opening of the Colquhuon show because it was the idea of how can we learn with Colquhoun? What conversations do contemporary artists open up about Colquhoun's work? So the show was a bringing together or a gathering of 4 artists who are based in Cornwall, who've been interested in the animisms of rock and geophysical matter. And their works disturb these borders between the inhuman and the human, life and non-life, the past and the future. And this was the cover here of the catalogue, which was riffing off really the cover of Colquhoun's book, Living Stones. And here is a photo of St Ives from the air, and this is Porthmeor Beach, and the Tate is on this beach, and so are these Porthmeor studios, which were used by well-known St Ives artists such as Borlase Smart, who loved the rocky coastline of Cornwall, but also people like Ben Nicholson and Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham and others. And this was the space that we held our little show. Put together with these artists, Andy Hughes, Jonathan Michael Ray, Oliver Raymond Barker, and Louise McClary. We're going to have a little look at their work in the last bit of the talk. Video work, maybe some work using photography and found objects, sculpture and painting. Coming back to living stones, these are some of the illustrations that Colquhuon used in the book. She put in a couple of photographs of local sort of coastline and also did these drawings, which, like that Scylla piece, has this sense of this phallic rock, these sort of magical, sparkling stones, but also a local Celtic cross. And she was interested in the geological substratum of Cornwall, but also its monuments and its myths and stories about stones and rocks. And here are some of the quotes. She said, "The life of the region depends ultimately on its geological substratum." And she talked about how the rocks give rise to the psychic life of the land, the granite, the serpentine, the slate, the sandstone, the limestone, and all the rest. She talks about the rude stone monuments, the relics of an unimagined age, repositories of an ancient power, of a living stones, stones that whisper, stones that dance, that play on a pipe or fiddle, that tremble at cockcrow, those that eat and drink, stones that march as an army, those unhewn slabs of granite hold the secret to the country's inner life. And there are some books. This Shelley Trower has written a book called Rocks of Nation, and she looks at 200 years, really since the Industrial Revolution, of the way that rocks have become fused with the idea of Cornwall as a nation, of its life and culture. And then there's a brilliant book by Geoffrey Jerome Cohen called Stone, an Ecology of the Inhuman. And he talks about this intimacy of rock and culture, of geology and culture. And he says, "Hurl a rock and you'll shatter an ontology, leave taxonomy in glistening shards." How rocks can actually straddle the idea of these different boundaries. At the time that Colquhuon wrote Living Stones and produced Living Stones, other artists were interested in the animisms of rock. Paul Nash and Eileen Agar, who were briefly in a relationship, both did works, paintings and photographs based in Brittany, Eileen Agar, that looked at rocks like these sort of looming sort of figures, these strange monstrous forms. And I love this drawing that was in the show by Colquhuon called Rock Pool. It's owned by the British Museum, again, with these strange sort of ties and strings, but this idea of seeing through to this dark threshold, but also like bodily forms. And then there's the front cover of Paul Nash's Shell Guide to Dorset, and one of his photographs of Avebury Stone Circle. And Nash, in fact, the art historian Sarah Phil claims that Nash's guide made the nation's ancestors appear as primitive monsters, that there was a sort of anti-humanism to this interest in the geological at this mid-century point. And I just throw out there, I'm going to be throwing out quite a few sort of strands for you in this rhizomatic way. But somebody I came across through this research on Colquhuon is Jaquetta Hawkes, who was a curator actually of the Festival of Britain. She curated the archaeology pavilion, but she wrote this brilliant book, and look, it's got like illustrations by Henry Moore in it. And she said, let me just move this. I can't actually see my quote. Yeah, she said, "It's only the pathetic shortness of human life that gives each individual a sense of the permanence." And she said, "We all walk," she said, "on the land we walk upon has been under the sea many times, and it will be submerged again." So a bit like this idea of extinctions. In 1951, Jaquetta Hawkes was imagining the geological idea of extinction and how this might happen again in the future. And I think it's very important that we think about this term, the Anthropocene, which is now bandied about as our current geological phase. And it's a phase that's proposed that is caused by human activity, encouraging climate change and global warming. And this idea of the presencing of geological life was also something at the time Colquhuon produced Living Stones. And earlier, even in mid-century, geologists like Arthur Holmes was talking about radioactivity and how the whole of the earth and its rocks were in fact dynamic, where molecules were in a constant state of flux. And today, of course, we've got environmentalists like Chris Packham, who's presenting the BBC's Earth series, where he presents us with this idea of the Anthropocene, but also this idea of mass extinction, how global warming has happened before and probably will again. And I love this photo of Chris Packham, who looks very like the Ruskin in Millet's portrait. And that's important because there's something about the visuals in the Earth series that uses this idea of the sublime, it uses sort of new technologies, visual technologies, to create this sort of rhetoric of the sublime, this universalizing rhetoric. And if we're thinking about theory that can help us, eco-critical theory, I love the work of T.J. Demos. He's produced this brilliant book called Against the Anthropocene. And he talks about this term, as he said, it continues to put man at the center. And he said what it doesn't do is undermine these deep levels of perception that we've inherited from the Enlightenment. He said it doesn't mess with them. It actually confirms some of this rhetoric. And he said what we need are visual tools or modes of perception that undo this, that allow us to unlearn that way of looking and perceiving modes of attunement. And another book about this really of geological thinking is by Catherine Yusof, who uses post-colonialism to decolonize thinking about the geological. So there's lots of great theory out there, but I'm really just going to leave you with this idea of Staying with the Trouble by Donna Haraway. And Donna Haraway writes, it's like holding a warm hand. It's so beautiful. And she uses this idea of new materialism and animism. And she says the most important thing is unlearning humanism, to become truly present, entwined in myriad unfinished configurations of places, times, matterings, and meanings. And what she's talking about there is that idea of relationality, of thinking in unbounded ways. So let's get back to Colquhuon for a minute. This is my touchstone, this work called Gorgon of 1946. And this work it's an oil on cardboard, and it's weird, isn't it? We're going to have a look at it in a bit more detail in a minute, but as I'm throwing it out to you, just think, what is it? Can you make it out? It's quite seductive, it's quite beautiful, but it's also a bit repellent. Does it remind you of anything? Probably all sorts of things. And who's this fantastic chap on the right who has opened up his jacket to show a t-shirt with Gorgon on it? And this is the wonderful Dr. Richard Shillitoe. If you go online and you look at the Colquhuon website, he's the great researcher who's been responsible for that, who's catalogued nearly all of her work. He's produced compilations of her writings. He's the most beautiful and generous spirit, and he was very supportive of our exhibition, The Living Stones, that's contemporary, and he just wants people to get involved and discuss Colquhuon's work and have these conversations and think about her currency. But there was a warning, because he bought the Gorgon piece that we're going to look at from Colquhuon after that Newlyn Orion show in 1977. And he said it was something visceral. He was so attracted to it. But it was pretty much unknown. She was unknown. And this was his work. And he was excited in a way, was the fact that nobody else really knew about it. And when this photograph comes from the conference that he did when the Tate show opened in 2025 in January, and he was wearing the t-shirt. And what he said was, actually, it's so weird owning a work that's now become valuable. He said it sort of interfered with his relationship with the work. So that's quite interesting for Christie's, isn't it? Thinking about the market, that as a collector, when you've had something that's been under the radar and suddenly it's become a valuable object and commodity, does it change? But there we go. Let's go back to this. So lots of exhibitions have happened in the past decade about surrealism. Brilliant. Surrealism Beyond Borders was all about global surrealism happening in Egypt, happening in Africa, happening all over the place. There was also ideas of British surrealism where Colquhuon featured. But during the time, 2022, there was an exhibition at the Guggenheim in Venice called Surrealism and Magic. And there have been lots of publications about art and magic recently. So these sort of interests in women and surrealism have brought Colquhuon into view. But I saw Gorgon in 2022 at the Venice Biennale in the exhibition called Milk of Dreams, which was curated by Cecilia Alemani. And you can see Gorgon here next to artists like Leonora Carrington. It was in the central pavilion in the basement. And on the wall text, Cecilia Alemani asks of these artists. How is the definition of the human changing? What constitutes life? What differentiates plants and animals, humans and non-humans? What are our responsibilities towards the planet, and what would life look like without us? So Colquhoun's Gorgon was placed in this context of contemporary art and asking these big questions about these boundaries between our life and non-life, etc. Now let's have a look at it. When I first saw this, I thought, oh, wow, this looks like a sort of coral reef, because I like diving. And it reminds me of going through beautiful colored sort of corals and through this sort of watery space. And then I also thought, wow, but it also looks quite fleshy, and these look a bit like ovaries. So it could be the interior of a body. These look a little like sort of clouds floating here, and these brilliant sort of close-ups, these look like growing vegetation. It could be mold or moss, but it also looks a bit like bone. So deathly, life, monstrous, generative, lots of sort of ambivalence about this. Like, what is it? Well, in the exhibition at Tate, the work on the right was shown with it. And what this is a peel from the work. And the process that this was made from is an automatist, surrealist process called calcomania, which Colquhuon was very much as a pioneer developing. And so she would put oil paint, lots of colors on a board, and then press another surface to it, paper, and then peel that off. Then look at the image and think, what does it remind me of? And then develop that with some more sort of painting to develop it into something. And she called this a type of divining, a creative prospecting, if you like. And she did a whole definition of this in an essay she wrote called Children of the Mantic Stain. So this idea of staining, looking, and then developing. Now, for me, who loves philosophy and theory, slightly sort of get lost down that rabbit hole, but I love the work of Deleuze, of Gilles Deleuze. And what I loved in Deleuze's writing is he talks about artists can be like seers, like sort of like people who see into the future. He said, but look at the forces of matter. They are like creative prospectors who follow their materials like a metallurgist follows the seams of ore. So a little bit like using this idea of matter to follow and discover things. Anyway, in the exhibition at Tate, they have these brilliant decalcomania doubles, the peels from these works that she did in the late 30s and 40s, the ones for attributes of the moon on the left and these doubles of alcove. Now, what was interesting in the exhibition was the work I saw on the left called Angel from 1937. And when I come back to Gorgon, you can see at the side, these sort of forms look a bit wing-like. And what Colquhoun said is when she first did the peel for Gorgon, she said it could have been an angel, like the idea of these wing-like forms, but actually it reminded us of something more monstrous. So she gave it the title Gorgon. Now, what do we think of Gorgon? If we think about myth, I remember working at the National Gallery. I used to love this painting by Luca Giordano called Perseus and His Followers Turned to Stone, where you've got Perseus holding up the head of Medusa with her snakes coming out of her hair. And what this does is to those soldiers who are gazing at this female, thinking about her beauty, they are then turned to stone. So they actually become petrified. So there's all sorts of wonderful feminist readings you could have of this, but this idea of gazing at something, but then it becomes a blinding. And there is this idea of this petrification. I was interested in that. But also it's interesting that Colquhoun was looking at the work of Dali when she was involved with surrealism. And we've got Dali's Metamorphosis of Narcissus, a work he actually took to see Sigmund Freud when he came in 1938 to London. He brought this work and took it to Freud. And what we have is a similar thing here, don't we? We have this soft sort of putrefying figure here looking into the water, and then this doubles as this sort of stony form sprouting. So it's a sort of life and death and putrefying doubling, which has a sort of similarity to Gorgon, I think. But here's throwing out lots of interesting leads for you. Jacques Lacan, the psychoanalyst, was fascinated by Holbein's ambassadors because of the anamorphosis of this skull, which is put into a different system of perspective, so that from the foreground or from the front, it becomes a blind spot. You can't see it. You get this weird, uncanny thing. But if you move to the side, it becomes visible, and you realize that death is in the image. And then, of course, when you think about Colquhoun's work, it could be a skull. It could be eye sockets. It could be, by being in the work, you find yourself in death, a sort of petrification. Well, hopefully, if we get through this, and Dominic will give me a warning in a bit, that we're going to have a little look to end with by a work by one of the contemporary artists that I put into the show by Andy Hughes called Being Plastic, which is also about a type of deathly thing. Okay, just wanted to touch a few things about Colquhuon, just to give you a sense of her. This beautiful self-portrait was in the show. It's also done through automatism, through staining with ink, which she's then developed through drawing into this uncanny self-portrait, which again, she looks as though she's some in dream state. This is a portrait of her by Man Ray on the left, when she was at the height of her sort of involvement with surrealism. In the 30s, and then another photo of her in the 1980s. She died in 88. I love the show for looking at these early works, which she described as a form of magic realism. She went to the Slade School of Art and developed a very, very tightly finished. She cut all the surfaces like polished ivory. This brilliant sort of painting, quite large-scale painting of Aaron meeting Moses. But look at these brilliant tree forms in the background. They're quite animistic as well. And this self-portrait she did of 1929, set against this uncanny, slightly rocky waterfall behind her. She was involved with the Surrealist exhibition when it came to London in 1936, something she saw. This is Dali wearing a diving suit in the Burlington Galleries in London, 1936. And she started working in a more surrealist manner, doing this beautiful, tightly worked, like Dali, I suppose, this water flower here. And then this weird male nude called Gouffre Amer, who is turning, is a bit like Full Fathom 5, Thy Father Lies, and of his bones a coral made. He is definitely in between life and non-life, type of skeleton that's forming sort of like a coral reef. And she actually went in 1939 with a group of artists, surrealists, to France, to a chateau. And she was friends with Roberto Matta, who was producing these more automatist works called psychological morphologies. And he was interested in how this type of automatism could put you in touch with earth forces. Colquhoun got into this, and she actually did a program for the BBC demonstrating decalcomania processes. Here she's burnt the paper with smoke to give these sort of strange, suggestive forms. I'm actually going to just pass over this because I think it's going to take me too long to talk about, but I'm going to talk briefly about her unlearning through magic. So she unlearns through this type of automatism, but she was also involved with magic circles, druidism, the Society of the Gold Dawn, the Fellowship of Isis, and she also started to take on her own magical sigil called the Splendidor Vitra, the sparkling nature of crystals. So she involved herself with magic. Art, like magic, for Colquhoun was a tool to see the unseen. And the Tate exhibition had some wonderful works where she was drawing from alchemy, from hermetic and esoteric thinking. And this beautiful drawing here was annotated with an inscription, the stone that is not a stone. This lovely idea of these sort of androgynous figures. But what I wanted to just lead up to our sort of conclusion with really is the idea of this space in the Tate exhibition called Earth Energies, which was based on her work in Cornwall. You can see the Livingstone's book here in the foreground. And it shows her relationship to living in Cornwall. She moved, first of all, in the late 40s to Lamorna. She had a funny little sort of shack called the Vow Cave. She called it the Vow Cave, which is her studio. She then moved to Paul, nearby in West Pentwith. This is a fantastic place. If you go to Cornwall, go to Nanjizzle Cove. Here's one of the paintings that was in the show called Stalactite, which you can see has got this cave which is, I suppose, the cave of the sea nymph, quite mythical. She also went to these different standing stones. These are stones at Boscawen, but also the 9 maidens, they were called. There were pieces in the show where she explored this idea of these 9 standing stones, the story of these women that were petrified for dancing on the holy day and end up in the stones as these sort of energies that connect to earth forces. She went to Menonthol, this Neolithic site, and I must just say, if you do go to Menonthol, it's very powerful. When I wanted to work at the Tate, I went there with my mum in the 1990s and said, we crawled through it 3 times, and I said, please give me the job at the Tate, and I did get the job at the Tate. So if you do go to Cornwall, you can go and try out the site. And anyway, so here we are. What I wanted to say was along this wall was some very interesting relationships between this work here, if we have a look at it, and the last room. We had these wonderful, I'm going to pass over this. This is so good, though. This is called Linked Islands. This is a beautiful gouache, which has got these strange animistic rocks, which are based on the islands of Scilly. Here's an aerial view of the 2 islands. And on one of them, we've got this St Warner's Well, this holy well. On the other, this phallic rock called the Old Man of Gew. So you can see how she's sort of kept this relationship to the real of the geological, but turned it into this animistic forms. Anyway, coming back to this, we've got this work on the left called Volcanic Landscape. And if we come to the very end wall here, the Tate show, you had this work called Dust Devil. And what they were leading to in this last room is Colquhoun's engagement with earth energies, with the volcanic. There's this work of 72 called Volcano, which is actually monogrammed and inscribed Mount Etna Eruption. And if you look at newspapers in 1970, there were many photographs of Etna's eruptions. These photographs showing this volcano pouring lava. And there's some brilliant sort of pieces by Colquhoun in the show. This was one of my favorite, called Volcanic Flare, where in an automatist technique, she poured enamel onto paper. And it's still got that beautiful finish like she had with those early works, very tight, but in this very loose way, almost this sort of burning, or even like a broken egg on a plate. And this other one called Crater's Edge. But these are very like this last room that the Tate showed, which are pieces that she did designs for, a tarot pack, a magical pack of cards, which are about divining the future. So these images she did of earth energies, these automatist works, these ideas of suggestive mark making, she also used to create the idea of reading the future with a tarot pack. Right, here we go. How are we doing for time, Dominic?
We're at 6:40, Lizzie.
Oh, right.
We've got loads of
Okay,
time.
so okay. Sorry, everybody, for my cold. I was slightly disorientated in that respect.
I think
I'm good.
disrupt your flow.
I want
So
to point out for this last bit. This is a work that was on that wall in the show by Colquhoun called Bikini, 1966. And just along the wall is this piece I've just talked about called Volcanic Flare. So these earth energies in 1966, she did a piece about these clouds, this nuclear explosion, this incredible energy of the earth to be monstrous and destructive. Because of course in 1946 was the Bikini Atoll testing, where the Americans did numerous nuclear testing in the Bikini Atoll. And here I sort of want to come back to Gorgon, which was painted the same year as the Bikini Atoll testing. This is 1966, so she sort of revisits this idea of the Bikini Atoll testing in 1966. But when I went to the Tate archive, I discovered this press clipping that was in her collection, which was from 1946. And what she'd done is ink it with orange inks and pink inks. So she turned it into a drawing. So what I feel was so exciting was in 1946, the year she created Gorgon, Colquhoun had collected the press clipping and had turned it into a drawing for herself. She didn't then make a painting which was overtly called bikini till the 1960s. But in 1946, she made Gorgon. So she turned, I feel these sort of toxic clouds in Gorgon become very interesting, don't they, when you think about this press clipping. So this idea of the earth being this monstrous power, Colquhoun has associated that with this sort of divining process of automatism. So I was very excited to discover that in the Tate's archive. Now, Colquhoun, why now? The Tate asked this, and in their catalogue, they had ecofeminists called by Astrida Nemanis and Nora Bowman were two ecofeminists that wrote an essay in the catalogue, and they talked about Colquhoun, and they said that Colquhoun's paintings time travel to offer abundant other worlds as joyful, supersized eco-feminist resistance. You also had the feminist and photo montage artist Linda, who wrote an essay in the Tate catalogue, and she produced or co-produced a ballet called The Children of the Mantic Stain, which was like Colquhoun's essay about automatism. And here's a photo of that ballet. And then there was also the contemporary artist Barty Kerr, who also wrote something in the catalogue, and her work was curated at Tate St Ives in to connect to Colquhoun's work. There was an exhibition of her work. And she said, a woman born in India carried back to England with her sacred and her ideas of non-dualism and made her life the work. So she paid homage to Colquhoun. So this was Tate in 2025 in January, in their catalogue, in their first iteration of the show in Tate St Ives, asked how does Colquhoun connect to ecofeminism and to contemporary artists. So in our little show, which is a pop-up show in that local studio, the Portsmouth studio, we put on these 4 artists who use in different ways the animisms of rock. And these 4 artists are all people who have, they've moved to Cornwall, most of them. Only one of them was born in Cornwall, Louise McClary. But they use this technique of walking the land, research tools. They spend time with the land and have used lots of different techniques. We've got Jonathan Michael Ray, who in the exhibition, we had these large scale drawings and they are called 9 Maidens. And in fact, there were 9 of them. We had a couple in the exhibition and he's used this ink to do these rubbings. He started off doing rubbings of the 9 Maidens that Colquhoun had visited in the 1940s and 50s. And he did these rubbings of the pitted surface of the stones. And from these rubbings, inked them into this sort of illegible lettering. But when you look at these drawings, the lettering seems to swarm, almost as though it's alive, and it creates this sense of a sort of murmuring resonance, as though the stones have a language that is sort of beyond tongues, as though we can't read it. There's a sort of a sense of being aphasic, like speaking in tongues. And then we've got Oliver Raymond Barker, another of the artists who's also a climber. He's climbed all over the world. And he said, as a climber, I have the visceral knowledge that stone is alive. It crashes and rumbles. It creaks and groans. It whistles and hums, a language beyond tongues. And this is one of the photos on the left he's taken when he's climbing. And what we put in the exhibition was this photo and a number of other works where he's called them the anatomy of stone, and they're chemigrams. They're a form of cameraless photography where he uses a type of light sensitive paper and presses this onto the surface of rocks he's climbed in Wales or rocks he's collected from climbing. And basically then exposed to light, they produce these extraordinary ecstatic images, which seem to be like volcanic lava, as though they've revealed the interior of the rock, the living nature of the rock, its energy and power, its sort of monstrous power, if you like. Then we've got the work of Louise McClary. Louise, who was born in Cornwall, she went to Penzance School of Art. She lives on the Lizard and she walks that coastline. She's fascinated by the serpentine rock pools of the beaches. And I loved this relationship between Colquhoun's rock pool from 47, that lovely drawing that the British Museum owns, and this piece by Louise called Beyond All Hearing, based on the rock pools on the Lizard, where you've got these sort of flows and layers of colour, of spray paint and acrylic paint, and the ideas of this light fluctuating on this water, of the exchange of the tides and rock and organic matter and inorganic matter. Oh, sorry, I was a bit out of sync here. Here we've got that Oliver Raymond Barker with the Colquhuon Gorgon, which I thought was rather beautiful. And here we've got a piece. Andy Hughes is the artist I first met at Tate in '93. He was an artist in residence. He's an environmentalist, a surfer, and an artist. And he did this piece, I've got a still from the video here, called Being Plastic. And Andy Hughes talks about plastic as offering an alien vision of the world. He said it doesn't decay, it's fluid in its purpose, it has a shape-shifting, endlessly mutable, it outlasts us, it basically has come from sunlight and organisms, and it's sort of going to eclipse human vision. And he talks about this sort of future or post-human future of plastic. Now, I'm hoping we get this video to work. Turn up your volume as it goes along. It's only a tiny few seconds of it, maybe 30 seconds. This is his video, Being Plastic, projects on a very large scale. Can you hear? Can you hear it?
I don't know if we can hear it, Lizzie, I'm afraid.
I just wondered, everybody, if you could actually hear that. Could you hear it, Dominic?
I'm not sure we could, Lizzie, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm
Describe it
just
to
going
us.
to describe.
Yeah.
Yeah. As this thing mutates and moves, you get this strange sound with this roaring sound. And so when you actually watch it projected large on a large screen, it actually shakes the environment you're in. But the relevance of that sound is it's sampled from a website, the National Organization of Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And basically they've got these under the water, they've got these sort of microphones that pick up ocean noises. And there was this weird sound that they describe as a bloop, and Andy sampled this sound, but that bloop they discovered was the sound of an iceberg cracking and dropping off as it melts and cracking underground. So basically this piece being plastic with this weird mutating form, which you say when you look at it, what is that? Well, it's actually a photograph taken through a plastic beer bottle that he discovered on a beach. And he was staying in Gapado, actually, in South Korea, and a lot of flow from the sort of seas of China and Japan. But this idea of seeing through plastic, he's very interested in that in terms of a type of post-human vision. And then combined with this sound, which is this idea of global warming, if you like, he talks very much about Timothy Morton's idea of hyperobjects. So we have these things that are so big, so vastly distributed in the world that we can't imagine them. That idea of planetarity, things like global warming, and you have something like a plastic bottle that actually gives you that sense of what that might be. How do we do that? Now, here, I keep saying I'm finishing, literally. But what is this strange little photograph here of these plastic sunglasses? They come from an essay written in 1957 by Roland Barthes called Plastic. And in this, he talks about how plastic, the term of it, polystyrene, etc., they just sound a bit like a Greek goddess. And he writes about plastic being fascinating, alchemical, being able to mutate its shapes. And he then finishes the essay by saying that the hierarchy of substances is abolished and a single one replaces them all. The whole world can be plasticized, even life itself, since we are told they are making plastic aortas. So 1957, Bart went to an exhibition about plastic and was fascinated by it taking over the world, plasticizing everything. 1957, Colquhoun writes Living Stones. I found in the book, buried in the book on page 167, she was looking for a holy well. She looked for many holy wells, Celtic holy wells, often marked by a stone or a stone alcove. And she said she went through this field, she tramped through the field, she struggled through the bushes, and then she went down a deep bank of stones. And how did she know that this had been there, that it's still in use today? She discovered a plastic cup hanging on a hook there. So I thought what's so interesting is 57 is a type of tipping point. We've had this idea of nuclear explosions, of nuclear energy. We've also got this plastic proliferating, being used and being sort of a sense of environmental presence. And in fact, Colquhuon made assemblages in plastic. And if you go to the beautiful Dr. Richard Silito's website, you will actually find Ephesian Diana, a work by Colquhuon of 67, which is made of polystyrene. And he illustrates it with this Ephesian Diana sculpture. And puts the two together. So strangely, Colquhuon was also engaging with plastic, and a bit like Andy Hughes, making work about plastic waste. And throwing out all these weird things to finish with, this is a work by Andy Hughes that I found in his studio. And I thought, look at that. And I don't know whether to even do this, Dominic. Shall I do something? Shall I do something to finish?
Go
We
on.
might as well.
Go on.
Just to throw you all exhausted. You're all exhausted. But this has to be one of my favorite quotes at the moment. It's by Derrida. So we might as well go there to end with. Derrida wrote about blind spots. And what I love about this is you read it and you don't know what he's talking about. And then you realize that, like Gorgon, you're almost in the middle of a skull. So ruin is this memory open like an eye, or like a hole in the bone socket that lets you see without showing you anything at all, anything of the all. This is for showing you nothing at all, nothing of the all. There is nothing of the totality that is not immediately opened, pierced, or bored through a blind spot. So that's what I'm hunting for, Dominic. I'm hunting for art that's about unknowing, that can allow you to be in these blind spots of the all, really.
Amazing. And what a way to finish. That was beautifully read, Lily. I'm glad we did that. Thank you so much. I mean, there was so many, I feel anything but blind. I feel like my eyes have been open. But what's interesting is you kind of, the multifaceted nature of Colquhoun is obviously something key here. And I love how you were kind of situating her within both contemporary art and eco-critical theory. I think it's interesting that all three of the questions, and I should say, feel free to put your questions in the chat now, are in reference to her sparking ideas and references. So we have Perotte making a comparison with the Madonna della Misericordia, the Virgin of Mercy. She mentioned Orgones as John and any contact with Burra. So clearly an interest in trying to categorize her when she's someone who can't be categorized.
Wow, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. Everyone, I meant to say at the beginning, please, with your questions, obviously that is an incredibly complex and very, very, unusual and interesting relationship I'll come back to. But please, if you just want to say anything, you can also say what you liked, what you found puzzling. Don't feel you've got to find some very complex question. But Dominic, coming back to this interesting question, the Madonna della Misericordia, could you just go back over what that was again, that relationship? Because I'm fascinated by that.
It's all I have, I'm afraid, Lizzie. It's very surreal. Madonna della Misericordia, says Perotte. Initial thoughts on that? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, do you know, I'd have to have a look at that.
Mm.
Has anybody got that
Yeah,
up?
let me
Can
flip
you,
that up. Hang on.
what does it look like? What's the relationship? Ask our lovely questioner what they feel a relationship is for them with that.
Gurpreet, are you able to elaborate while I get
Because
this up?
I'm gonna being
Mm.
slightly coldy.
I'm just going to replace the current share. Here we go. Is that, can you see that? Is that
Let me
coming
have a
through
look.
for you, Lily?
Hmm. Ah, the Gorgon. Yeah, no, I'm with it. I'm with it. Oh, wow. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. Look at that. That brilliant relationship between Colquhoun's Gorgon and this brilliant early Renaissance painting of the Madonna with her red dress and this open cape with these beautiful folds that are enclosing these figures in this, quite scary cave-like form. That's absolutely brilliant. I will never forget that. Thank you so much. And that idea of bodies and yeah, wow. Thank you, Dominic.
Yeah. We have here a question from Andra, who says, "What a wonderful lecture."
Oh,
And he particularly loved the theory and is asking about other influences I've had other than the surrealists. So Dadaists, collage art, anything about the kind of
yeah,
influences
you
there.
know, so influences she had or influences things that influenced her?
Yeah, I think
What's
so,
that?
yeah. Things that influenced her, exactly.
Things, wow. Do you know? Yeah, now I'm thinking to that I don't know how many of you have seen the exhibitions, because obviously we've got the one that was in St Ives, but currently still on is the one that's in Tate Millbank. And I love that. And it's also been timed with Edward Burrough. So you've got the two shows going side by side. So it's given a slightly different context and set of questions about Colquhoun. So I think with the borough as well, what's interesting about those early works by Colquhoun, there's incredibly detailed figurative works, which she describes as magic realism. And they have, I think that Madonna della Misericordia, they have that very early Renaissance feel to them. And if I think about Colquhoun with influences, what I found so confusing, which is really good, I love when I get confused because I can get quite cocky, I think, having studied art history for so many years, be this sort of fluent playing across different things. The fact that I started looking at Colquhoun's work in 2022 and was like, oh, this is weird. Don't think I've seen anything like that before, is that I wasn't automatically getting these relationships to other artists. And for instance, for an artist working in Cornwall, where was her relationship to all that St Ives modernism? No, she was on her own there. In terms of surrealism, when we looked at that Dali, the Metamorphosis of Narcissus just now, yes, you got that feeling that Dali was important for her in the 30s. And yes, that Roberto Matta with that automatism. But then she slightly goes back to with those landscapey works in St Ives and Cornwall. She goes back to those landscapey works. There again, like they're not particularly like neo-romanticism or Nash. She's quite an individual, I think. And as I say, for her, art was a tool like magic. It wasn't that she wanted to engage in art debates or place her work in art contexts. It was a tool to think with for her. Yeah, very much. Thanks.
That's super interesting. And does that, I'm fascinated by this idea of you discovering her, being confused, and then reading about her. But it's almost like a circle, isn't it? The papers were your tool to see her art, and then the art became your tool to see unseen things about
Yeah.
her.
Yeah. And also, Dominic, the thing about that pop-up show we did
Yeah.
is that for me, it was the Colquhoun. I started studying Colquhoun, and then I was like knowing a few of these artists that I was living close to. And I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. Those artists are letting me see Colquhoun differently. It's not that I'm thinking Colquhoun's influenced them in any way, but those contemporary works were giving me a lens back onto Colquhoun. And then you think, well, what was Colquhoun doing in the 50s, in the 40s and 50s that's relevant to us now? And if you do read the Living Stones book, it's full. In fact, Colquhoun is angsting all the time about the number of tourists in Cornwall, the amount of traffic, the threat to the environment. And then, as I say, she was interested in the nuclear. She's interested in the news. She's collected these press clippings. I feel that, her animisms are based very much on the real. It's not like some, like sort of alternative, like slightly mystical thing out there. She's like, how does this help me think about the now? And I feel, how does Colquhoun help us think about the now? She seems very relevant. Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's go back to the start then. Let's talk about the stones, the lithic quality. And Christina asks, thank you. And being unfamiliar, it's the first time with Colquhoun's work. Is the lithic theme, I know you just touched on this, predominant, would you say, in the context of her oeuvre?
No, I mean, if you, well, yes and no. If you go around the show, there's so much about the erotic. Yeah. Amy Hale is one of the major researchers who's input ideas to the catalogue, and she's written about the sort of the esoteric sex magic of Colquhoun and the tantric. And there's this brilliant room. They use this lovely color coding in the wall backgrounds of the walls in both the Tate St Ives iteration and the London iteration. And they had a beautiful soft pink room full of these sort of erotic diagrams and hermetic sort of esoteric philosophy. So there's a lot about the erotic and the magic, but then there's also a lot about the animism of nature, and then within that the lithic and the geological, but also not just the lithic as geological, but also cultural, all the myths and stories about stone, and obviously the monuments that are very prevalent in Cornwall, standing stones, the Celtic, etc. Yeah, so you'll find a lot of it.
I speak of the monuments. I love the image of you in the men and toll going through
Crawling through. It's not the only time, Dominic. It's not the only time. Menental has delivered. Thank you, Menental, to me a couple of times.
I kind of think she would have loved that. From what I've heard today, it sounds like the kind of thing Colquhoun would have been very much for.
Because, but it's not easy to find. Long may it stay that way. The thing about Cornwall, you haven't got these big signs saying, Menental this way. You've got to go across the moors, and it's quite a modest monument, really. It doesn't stand out there, and like sort of like Stonehenge, but yes, very exciting.
Got to know these things. And just because we're slightly running on time here, very last question for you, Lizzie. This has been absolutely fascinating. We could go on for hours and hours and hours, and I'm sure everyone would love to see it, but we have to let you go. What would you like to see next for Colquhoun? How do we build from here? What does the future hold?
Wow. I think when I was in that, I hope that exhibitions are like, as I say, thresholds themselves, that they're like a party. I always love things about curating, because by taking a work and putting it into an exhibition, it changes. It sits next to something. It's in dialogue with something. It looks different. Ideas come up. They're generative. And Walter Benjamin, a great cultural theorist, he said, if a work of art cannot live in the present, then it threatens to disappear. So works of art are like music. They get replayed all the time. And the thing about an exhibition, as I say, it takes a work, puts it into dialogue with other things in the show. They change, they throw up ideas. And then when people visit the show, they have different connections they make, they take away. And then, as I say, we've got Tate Archive. I would love to encourage people to have the confidence to go online or phone up and book in and go in and say, could I see some files from the Colquhuon archive? and just spend an hour, have a cup of tea, go in there, spend an hour and hunt through, because that directness of exploring that material is mind-blowing. You'll have all sorts of discoveries in there and hopefully become tools for you to think with. But please, the thing I ask is be open to unknowing. And in fact, is a bit of a provocative thing to say at the end, is I don't know about you, Dominic. I don't know about everybody listening, but do you like art that confirms your taste? Do you have things at home that say, I love beauty, this is what I believe beauty is, this is what I like art to do what I like? Or do you like art that messes with your head? I would like Colquhuon to encourage you to celebrate art that messes with the way that you look, that is like a friction, that challenges you, slows you down, changes you, makes you puzzle, because those are the tools we need now in our environmental predicament. We need to change our modes of perception. If we don't do that, nothing, we're not going to live well in this time of trouble. That's what I think.
Amazing. Well, what a way to finish. Thank you so much, Lizzie. That was beautiful, wonderful.
Thank
I'm running
you.
out of superlatives. It was a delight. And thank you all for joining us this evening. As I say, do reach out via email if you would like the recording for this. Lizzie, thank you so much. I'm going to go and
Thanks for
read
hosting so
all
beautifully.
about Colquhuon. It was amazing. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much.
Well,
And
thank you,
all.
everyone. It was really energetic, even, like I can't see you, but I felt the energy. Thank you so much.